good people don't smoke marijuana.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
The medical marijuana. The medical marijuana. Radio show. The medical marijuana for you and me. Ah, yeah, the medical marijuana. Whoa, 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 ah, yeah, the medical. It's the medical marijuana show. You knew we know.
I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you. Hey, boy, don't feel my world untrue. Yeah, I want to talk to you. My world can be true if you do what I tell you to. I want to talk to you.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Medical Marijuana Radio. This one is for Saturday, the 9th of December 2017. I'm your host, Larry Love, and we're here every week to bring you the latest information on the medical use of cannabis and the fight for legalization and adult use of cannabis as well. This week, a couple of really important things. First, our guest is going to be Robert Edward Roundtree III, an activist, a patient, an advocate, an entrepreneur in Florida that's fighting for the Florida program, along with a lot of other people. We're going to talk to him in the second part of the show. First, of course, we're going to do some news for you, but I found a couple of clips this week that I feel are some of the most important clips that I'll ever play on the show. And it's from projectcbd.org, and it's an interview with Martin Lee and Dr. Dustin Sulak. And it's about dosing. There's one clip about dosing, and then another clip about tolerance and how to fix your tolerance. So we're going to play that in just a little bit and do some news for you. And then again, we'll have Robert Roundtree to talk about Florida, and it's a great interview. So first up, of course, everybody is wondering what's going to happen with Jeff Sessions, and I have three stories here on Sessions because it's really quite important. He held a meeting just a couple of days ago, a roundtable at the Department of Justice, and here are his comments.
I appreciate the opportunity to hear your analysis on marijuana and some of the related issues. I think it's a big issue for America, for the country, and I'm of the general view that this is not a healthy substance. I think that's pretty clear. And then there's a policy response that we and the federal government needs to be prepared to take and do so appropriately and with good sense. I do believe, and I'm afraid, that the public is not properly educated on some of the issues related to marijuana, and that would be a matter that we could all of us together maybe be helpful in working on, and that would allow better policy to actually be enacted.
Dr. Gupta, where are you? The public needs more education about marijuana, cannabis? Gotta be effing kidding me. This guy is living with his head. Let's see, where should I say he puts his head? Well, maybe in the sand. That's a polite way of saying it. He needs more education on cannabis. Certainly not the public. The public knows and the public wants cannabis to be legal for medical and for recreational use. Here's a video from some time ago from ABC with Sessions, and the DOJ intern is asking a question about his stance on marijuana. This is Jeff Sessions talking to an intern. Listen to his attitude.
You support pretty harsh policies for marijuana, and pretty lax gun control laws. I'm not even sure where you stand on the assault weapons ban. So I'd like to know, since guns kill more people than marijuana, why lax laws on one and harsh laws on the other?
Well, that's apples and oranges question, I would say, first and foremost. But the Second Amendment, you're aware of that, guarantees the right to the American people to keep and bear arms, and I intend to defend that Second Amendment. It's as valid as the First Amendment. And so that's my basic philosophical view about it. Look, there is this view that marijuana is harmless and it does no damage. I believe last year was the first year that automobile accidents that occurred were found to have been caused more by drugs than by alcohol.
Lie.
Marijuana is not a healthy substance, in my opinion. The
Lie.
American Medical Association is crystal clear on that.
Big lie.
You believe that?
I don't.
Okay. So, Doctor, whatever your name is, so you can write to AMA and see why they think otherwise.
I think the AMA needs to send a shitload of paperwork over to this man who's got our lives in his hands, and to show him that he doesn't know what the F he's talking about. Lies and the denial of science. Meanwhile, California is going to be starting the recreational program at the first of the year. It's going to roll out a little slowly, but here is a little interview with the governor, Brown, of California, being interviewed about recreational, and also his lieutenant governor, Gavin Newsom, in response to questions about the rollout of legalization and the climate with Jeff Sessions and the DOJ.
How will California respond if Attorney General Sessions decides to raid marijuana dispensaries?
Barack Obama was very aggressive. I would argue was even more aggressive out here in the Bay Area. Certainly was more aggressive than even the Bush administration, going after medical marijuana clubs. And that's why those that are in the business of medical dispensaries and will be in the business of having recreational dispensaries better play by the rules. And the fact is, we move towards legalization to get people into the daylight and into the sunshine of a regulated environment, which means you've got to act maturely. You've got to play by the rules. You can't play in the margins. There's no more black market.
What do you think of the future of recreational marijuana in California, given the likelihood of Jeff Sessions as the federal attorney general?
I have no idea. I'm sure if history is a guide, it probably has a bright future. So sometimes you take a step forward and then a step backward. But I think people will be able to satisfy this particular need in one way or another.
Legalization of marijuana is a social justice issue. It's an economic justice issue. It's a racial justice issue. Because it's about reconciling the fact the war on drugs has been an abject failure, and it's been a war perpetrated on people of color. It's been a war perpetrated on the African American community and the Latino community disproportionately. And these are objective truths. This is not an assertion. These are fundamental facts.
Colorado was one of the leading states that started the movement to suggest that marijuana is not dangerous. And we're going to find it, in my opinion, ripple throughout the entire American citizenry, and we're going to see more marijuana use, and it's not going to be good.
A lot of people in politics that have zero courage, whose entire lives are about their own self-aggrandizement, that will not fight for the lives of poor folks that are struggling, million-plus folks incarcerated, lives destroyed because of nonviolent possession related to marijuana. Many that are on probation, parole, many that are out trying to get jobs but have felonies on their records that have to check a box and can't get a job. I find it offensive that politicians hide behind their own electoral prospects and not fight for those folks that deserve more and deserve better.
Again, that was Gavin Newsom, the Lieutenant Governor of California, and Governor Brown of California, talking about what their thoughts are on the possible federal crackdown on cannabis. And Sessions just, he's really a piece of work. It's unbelievable. But now, here's some really important stuff. Again, I think this is some of the most important things I've ever played on the show. We're going to take a little break from the news right now. We will get back to it, and then, of course, we'll have our guest talking about Florida. ProjectCBD.org is an amazing website with all kinds of great information and videos. So Martin A. Lee, who is one of the big guys there at ProjectCBD.org, is interviewing Dr. Justin Sulak, who is a cannabis doctor and has some really great information from all of his studies. Dr. Sulak is also the director of Integrate, that's INTERGR 8 Health, and co-founder of Healer.com. And you should check out those websites as well. So this first clip is the most important thing. It's about dosing. It's about how to dose yourself and what's important about finding your dose and so forth. And then the second clip will be about people who have hit a tolerance and how to fix that. So here's the first clip.
Dr. Sulak, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here, Martin.
You know, one issue that I think is really a challenge for both patients and physicians when it comes to an educational website that's chock full of helpful information for patients and physicians. Dr. Sulak, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here, Martin.
You know, one issue that I think is really a challenge for both patients and physicians when it comes to cannabis therapeutics is the whole issue of dosing and how one begins a correct dosing regimen for their condition and their situation. You've done a lot of work in this area, kind of path-breaking really. How do you determine an appropriate dosage recommendation for a patient?
Well, that's a great question, and I get asked that question a lot. There's really no way for someone like me or any practitioner to meet a patient and learn what's going on with them and say, I know exactly what you need to do in terms of cannabis dosing. It just doesn't exist because people have such a varied response to the medicine. And there's so many different types of medicines. And from what I've seen in my practice, there's this huge dosing range where some people do well with really low doses, other people do well with really high doses. There's all the different delivery methods. So instead of trying to figure out exactly what someone should do, what I found works the best is to give someone a starting point and then give them a methodology, a program for titrating from that starting point to determine what works best for them based on their individual goals.
So what might be an example? If there's a patient who's cannabis naive who comes to you with a certain condition, how do you deal with that? What criteria do you use to develop a dosing regimen?
Right, so the first thing I would do with that patient is understand if they have any fears about cannabis. Because we see a lot of people that are cannabis naive, meaning they've never tried it before. They're interested in it, they've probably known someone that's gotten good results with it, but they're also a little scared. And so we know that one's mindset and one's setting, their environment, can determine their experience with cannabis, you know, and it can be related to side effects that they may or may not experience if they're set up with a positive expectation. So I like to go through and dissuade any myths or address any fears that they might have, and at the same time figure out what that person's goals are. So say it's someone that's cannabis naive, maybe someone in their later years that has arthritic pain or low back pain. And so sure, one goal would be to reduce pain, another goal might be to improve sleep, and maybe to improve function. You know, I want to be able to play with my grandkids, or I want to still be able to mow the lawn or something like that. So we set some realistic goals. And then the first thing I would do with that patient is get them started on a dose of cannabis that's actually sub-therapeutic. I think what works the best for the most people, especially cannabis naive, is something they can take orally to be absorbed through the mucosa in the mouth. And they can certainly swallow a little bit and absorb some through the GI tract. So an alcohol-based tincture or an oil, and something that we know the dosage of. We know how many milligrams of CBD, how many milligrams of THC. Typically, I would start with about an equal ratio, a 1-to-1 ratio for most patients because it's very effective and very well tolerated. But if that person had a history years ago, say of having a paranoid reaction to cannabis, then I would go much higher on the CBD and lower on the THC, maybe a a 4-to-1 or even an 8-to-1.
And would there be a situation where you might go higher on the THC and lower on the CBD in this context, or
Absolutely, Martin. Even the people that come to me that really don't want a psychoactive experience, I encourage them to do that during the day. But for folks in the evening, or maybe even just once a week on the weekend, I usually recommend that they do something THC dominant to get some of that consciousness that cannabis has to offer, to help them get a new perspective on their lives, to help them solve their problems creatively, and just to laugh and enjoy themselves. And also, THC dominant cannabis sometimes just works better for people. Sometimes it works better for pain and better for anxiety, better for spasticity, and is more likely to help with sleep.
So when we talk about high dosing and low dosing of cannabis, what kind of range are we really talking about that you've seen in your practice? And how low can work? How high might be necessary? What's the range there?
So I've been really surprised by what I've found. And part of the discovery has been really just listening to patients. And they bring in their formulas, and we can test them in our lab, which is part of the office. And sometimes we're really surprised to see that some people do great with just milligrams per day, single milligrams, even as low for an adult as 1 to 2 milligrams a day, total cannabinoids. That's the very low end of the range that I'm seeing. And it might sound hard to believe. It's certainly below the psychoactive threshold. But at these tiny doses, over time, people find that they're feeling better and their function's better, their symptoms are reduced. So that's the low end. The high end, for people that have sometimes failed the low and moderate dose approach, also for people that are trying to treat aggressive cancers and other severe conditions, the high end goes up to thousands of milligrams, maybe 2,000 or more per day. So we have 2 milligrams, 2,000 milligrams, and then a whole range in between, which can be somewhat predictable, but it varies from one individual to the next.
Wow, what great information that is. But people do also come to a tolerance when you're taking cannabis. If you ever, just been, let's say, smoking the same strain for a while, and then all of a sudden it doesn't do what you like it to do, and so forth. Or I went through it a few weeks ago, actually. I take some drops of canna oil that I make with some coconut oil and for sleep, and it got to the point where I had to take more and more to get the result. So I believe I hit a tolerance. Now that was before I actually listened to this next clip, and so a couple of weeks ago I actually took 3 days off of not taking any oil at all, just smoking some cannabis, and then when I went back to the oil, I was able to go back to my original dose, which was like 8 drops, when I had gone up to like close to 20. So here is, again, Dr. Dustin Sulak talking with Martin A. Lee of Project CBD about tolerance and fixing a tolerance.
So what if you're dealing with a person who's a long-time user of cannabis, who's coming to you, a chronic user? Doesn't seem like a low dose would necessarily be appropriate because that person's already using high doses. What have you found in terms of dealing with people in that context?
This is really interesting, and it's been a big part of the work that I've done. We've had numerous patients that are already using cannabis that come in saying, this used to work better for me. How can I adjust my use to get more health benefits? And typically the answer is to reduce their dose. And I've found that over time, everyone has an optimal dose of cannabis where they don't build tolerance, they get the most benefits, they get the least side effects. When they exceed that optimal dose, they start to lose the benefits over time. Then they think they need to use more in order to regain those benefits. They use more, and over time the benefits diminish even more. So I developed a 6-day protocol. I call it the sensitization protocol. And it involves 2 days of cannabis abstinence and then 4 days of very careful dose titration. And what happens, people come in, they reduce their dose by at least 50% over those 6 days. So by the end of the program, they're using less, they're feeling more benefits, they're feeling less side effects, they're saving money, and it's just great for them. And I say 50%, but often it's a lot more. Something I hear quite frequently goes like, Doc, I was smoking 12 joints a day, now I'm smoking 2. And it's stronger, it feels better, I'm getting more benefit from it.
Wow, what great information. Again, that was Martin A. Lee from projectcbd.org. Write it down, go there, read everything, watch their videos. It's a great, real news about cannabis site. And then Dr. Dustin Sulak is the director of Integrate, INTERGR8 Health, and the co-founder of Healer.com, where there's some great information and some short videos up there that can be very helpful to you and to your loved ones and friends. Okay, back to some news. Here is New Mexico State Representative Bill McCamley on opioid and cannabis.
December 7, 2017. My name is Bill McCamley. I'm a state representative from Las Cruces and Mesilla here in New Mexico, and this is your update for the day. I encourage the Secretary to agree with the Medical Cannabis Board in allowing for opioid addiction to be used as a reason for people to get a medical cannabis card. They asked her to do it last year on a 5-1 vote. She did not. She said there needed to be more research. They did it again this year, the advisory board, on a 6-0 vote with a lot more research, and she said she's going to be looking through that. So hopefully she does that. This is something that works, and with the opioid problems we have here in New Mexico, it's something we need to do.
Yes, and we also need to have the Secretary of Health, who is practicing medicine without a license and is an attorney, listen to her advisory board of physicians. And thank you, Representative McCamley, for that. New states coming online. We're going to talk about the problems in Florida in a few minutes, but there's already a shortage of medical cannabis in the state of Maryland that just started recently.
A shortage of medical marijuana in Maryland. The first licensed dispensaries opened up in the state just days ago, but they're unable to keep up with the high demand. Tracy Leong explains how businesses and patients are reacting.
Some medical marijuana patients say they've waited years for this to open up in Maryland, so waiting just a couple of weeks really isn't that big of a setback. Maryland's medical marijuana dispensaries have almost completely run out of their supply within days of opening.
It's quite expected. The demand at any new industry is not as consistent as one would like. And so the growers have released limited product. And now a lot of folks, because of the high demand, ran out.
William Askenazi is the co-owner of Potomac Holistics in Rockville. His dispensary, along with the handful that just launched in Maryland, experienced the same issue, forcing them to sell a smaller quantity to patients or turn them away until their next shipment arrives. An issue even the Maryland Medical Cannabis Commission expected, at least in the beginning.
And so the first harvest came through in a smaller amount. Second, third, fourth, fifth harvests, which are cyclical, will start coming through in much more abundance. That will satisfy the demand, and then prices will come down.
The medical marijuana industry is confident this is just a minor setback that will be resolved shortly.
A lot of folks on both sides of the aisle, the dispensary aisle, the grower aisle, but most importantly the patients, understood that when you roll out any new industry, there'll be a few hiccups. I'm confident that we're now over those hiccups.
The commission has pre-approved nearly 100 other businesses to dispense medical marijuana, but because of the rigorous process, it's unclear when those will open up. I'm Tracy Leong reporting for WJZ.
Again, that's in Maryland, and you can Google this if you'd like, but cannabis is good for the hiccups, believe it or not. And you should believe it because it's real. Anyway, moving around the country, this coming session in 2018, a lot of states are going to be trying to legalize for medical and for recreational use. Here's a short story. Should medical cannabis be legal in Kentucky?
The men and women around this table support Kentucky becoming the 30th state to legalize medical marijuana. Eric Pollock and Brad Steiner are Iraq War veterans who say without marijuana, they might not be here to tell their story.
There's not really coming back from what we had to see over there and what we had to do. I found a little bit of peace when I can use cannabis to calm my brain.
Pollock says his PTSD and anxiety was so bad he considered killing himself, but his wife stopped him and said he needed to stop taking prescription pills.
I got out of the Army on a lot of different pills. It took me 2 years to wean off of them, and I transitioned into cannabis because it's what I have. It's natural.
The same goes for Steiner.
I feel better not on the medications than I did on them.
Secretary of State Allison Lundergan Grimes chairs the task force with Democratic Representative John Sims. Sims is working on a bill that would legalize medical marijuana in Kentucky, which is something Governor Bevin has said he supports if it's crafted correctly. The bill would likely include that all participants must register through the state. There would be no advertisements and no public smoking. Kentucky legislators have introduced medical marijuana legislation before, but it's never taken off. Grimes says she believes legalizing medical marijuana would be a game changer for the Commonwealth and people like Pollack and Steiner.
We can help them. We can help make sure they're not addicted to a life of opioids, but instead productive members of society.
The task force plans to meet again next month. Reporting in Frankfurt, I'm Carolyn Callahan, WLKY News.
Okay, again, that was Kentucky trying to do the right thing and help not only their veterans, that cannabis is helping really well, people. But we're going to move over to Indiana, and they're drawing battle lines in the 2018 legislative session. And boy, there's a lot of people that are just against this and just, again, denying science and reality.
And today, a strong message from the Association of Indiana Prosecuting Attorneys against the legalization of marijuana for any purpose. They gathered with reps from the Indiana Chamber and local law enforcement to take a stand ahead of the 2018 legislative session. There are several bills proposed that could lead to legalization in our state. This group cites the marijuana industry targeting children with THC-laced ice cream and gummies. And while the conversation is often steered toward medical help, this group says it's really about corporate greed.
Let's just be real. Legalization of marijuana is not about taking care of our kids. It's about a profit-hungry industry of men in suits, not Woodstock hippies with joints. We're talking about men in suits trying to drive a profit and revenue.
The war on drugs isn't over. It fights day in and day out in your communities.
I also spoke with Jeff Staker, the leader of Hoosier Veterans for Medical Cannabis Incorporated. He tells me he's hopeful these bills are discussed in committee because he believes medical marijuana saves lives, saying today, if we do nothing and stay idle, more veterans are going to die. Now, Staker believes medical cannabis helps with PTSD and can be a safe alternative to opioids for veterans who have long-term chronic pain. Again, the battle begins next month when session gets underway.
Good luck, Indiana. Boy, you have some strong naysayers there that just don't get it. They don't understand. Dabbing, dabbing has only been around, as far as I know, for the last, 5-7 years or so. The first of its kind study will examine dabbing and driving. And this is being done, of course, in Colorado, where things should be easier to study, but there's a twist to how they're going to be doing this one.
CU Boulder researchers got an early Christmas present. Money. Lots of money to study high-potency marijuana, which is now available through legal markets, both recreational and medical dispensaries. But there's not a lot of research on the effects of those products on the brain or behavior. The Institute of Cognitive Science scored an $839,500 grant from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment to conduct that research.
Dabbing or the use of these concentrates is a relatively newer phenomenon. Although they're legal in the state, they are not legal federally, and so as a federally funded institution, we as researchers have we cannot actually touch these products or manipulate them or access them directly for research. But what we can do is we can observe people who use them. Users will use as they would in their home, and then they can immediately come out to our mobile lab where we can do validated assessments, measure how much marijuana got into their blood, look at their brain function, and do simulations for driving ability and other relevant behaviors.
You heard that right. They are going to get onto a bus and drive to different houses. Those who live in those houses will dab. Then they'll come out of their houses and hop on the bus to be studied. It's all supposed to start in January. Obviously, if we can make it work, we'd love to see how that whole traveling bus thing works.
So that'll be interesting. I'd like to know, the effects of long-term dabbing as well. So, all right, before we take a break and talk to Robert Edward Roundtree III about what's going on in Florida, Robert's not the only person that's, fighting very hard for that program down there. Gary Stein, who's been a guest before on this show, has a little audio blog, and He travels all around Florida fighting so hard, for this program. And here is his blog from a couple nights ago, Can a Fight Tonight with Gary Stein.
Good evening and welcome to your Can a Fight Tonight. One more time I decided to go ahead and broadcast live from Tallahassee before I head out to go to the next big thing. But first, one more thing. We did pretty decently today in the Joint Administrative Procedures Committee, where they took a look at all the things that Christian Bax has and has not been doing and took them to the woodshed. Basically, there were page after page after page of letters written by this committee to Christian Bax, the person who's supposed to be in charge of the Office of Medical Marijuana Use, and find out why he has not met the deadlines that were in not only the amendment itself, but also in SB 8A and every other deadline he's been given. He's been doing things out of context, out of order. He has done them so improperly that there are literally hundreds of errors they found in the rules and regulations that he propagated and posted. This is unacceptable because it's not about bureaucracy. Although it is the beginning, in the end, it's about patience. Every single time that he creates a delay, it's a ripple effect, a butterfly effect if it were, and we are not going to get the medicine we need. There's not enough dispensaries out there to take care of the patients that are getting into the registry. We have over 60,000 patients in the registry. That's as many as the state of Oregon has over their 20-year program. And we've only had that program here for 10 months. The number of patients is growing, and my patience is not. It's getting shorter and shorter every day. I see people suffering. They're being given the choice of either breaking the law and get the relief they have or suffering. And if Christian Bax and the Office of Medical Marijuana Use and the governor's office are okay with the constituent suffering, then we're in trouble. But I have a feeling the governor's office is not in favor of people suffering. So here's what you do. On this post, there is the phone number for the governor. You can call that number and say, the Office of Medical Marijuana Use in the Executive Office of the State of Florida is not doing their job. People are suffering, and we are far, far behind in the proper implementation of the will of the people, the 71.3% of the people who voted for Amendment 2. This is not being done right, and we need a change in leadership of that agency. We need to get it done now. So call that number. I believe it's 850-888-4000 or something, or 545-8000. It's written on the post. Read it. Call it. Call often.
Again, that's Gary Stein, who's fighting the good fight there in Florida. And we'll be right back with our guest, Robert Roundtree III, who's also fighting the good fight in Florida. And we're going to talk about how a Canadian company has come in, grabbed a license for money, and now is fighting against selling flour. We'll be right back.
It's all about the 420 MMJ Radio. The medical marijuana. The medical marijuana radio show.
Hi, this is Grace from Argantica. You're listening to Medical Marijuana Radio.
And we're back. And online I have Robert Edward Roundtree III, who is calling in from Florida to tell us what's going on down there with their medical program. Robert is an activist. He's a patient and an advocate for the program. And his website is floridamarijuana.net. And welcome to Medical Marijuana Radio, Robert.
Hey, thanks for having me. And thanks for all your listeners. I appreciate you having us on, or I say us, me and the Floridians that I represent.
Well, you have a program down there that is not really been enacted like the 71% voted for. So your latest blog on FloridaMarijuana.net is talking about a Canadian cannabis producer called Afiria, I guess they pronounce it, and they filed a motion to prevent whole flower in cannabis in Florida. So tell me about that, and how did they get a license?
Okay, so the short story is they came in and bought one of the original licenses. Long story is there's a cannabis cultivator in Gainesville, Chestnut Hill. They sold out to Afiria. Afiria is a Canadian company. They're one of the biggest cannabis producers maybe in the world. And they came in, it's a mess. So they came in, they created a holding company. They created like a management company that runs the license in Florida. So it's owned by a Canadian company now, despite the residency requirements that everyone wants. So they actually produce flower in Canada. You can buy their flower. They just had a deal go down with Shoppers Drug Mart in Canada. So they'll be in like all their drugstores.
I did see that this week that they did hook up with a major regular drugstore. So in Canada, they're going to be able to put cannabis products with THC in drugstores.
I think it may be for delivery, but they're getting to their customers that way through the Shoppers Drug Mart. Like you'll be able to purchase their products and they'll deliver it. I don't think they're going to get shelf placement or retail placement at this time, but I'm not sure, and I may be inaccurate with that.
Right,
but
it'll probably be.
Issue,
I'm sorry. It'll probably be some kind of prescription thing, like kept behind the counter. I'm guessing. But so if they're producing successfully flower in Canada, then what's the rub here? Besides the fact that I think maybe the Florida law currently, the way it's written, doesn't allow for flower. But people like Gary Stein and you and Chris Sunshine, you're all fighting for this. So tell me about what is their reasoning that they don't want to use whole flower.
Okay, well, let me bring you up to speed on how Florida's situation is. You are correct that whole flower is technically banned under the smoking ban in Florida. You're not allowed to smoke, so that pretty much eliminates all whole flower. But within SB8A, which is the Senate bill that provided the regulations for the Department of Health to use as guidelines, it specifically says that you can use a flower product in a tamper-proof cup designed for vaping. So that's in the law. You can do that. So TruLeaf, the original license awardee in Florida, they've been first to everything, first to market, first to put a product out. They designed a product that is statutory compliance. They filed with the Department of Health to get approval of the product, because that's how it is in Florida. You can't just put out a new product. It has to get approved by the Department of Health. It fits their statutory requirements. Department of Health hasn't responded. And the way it works in Florida is if they don't respond within 90 days, it's assumed approved. And during that 90 days, all of the other cannabis producers that are licensed by the state have an opportunity to object. And Afiria filed an objection. They filed a motion to intervene with TruLeaf's rollout of the product. On my blog post, I have a copy of both of the full text of Afiria's motion to intervene and TruLeaf's response. And Afiria wasn't shy about why they really wanted to do this. And it specifically states that it would negatively impact their SOPs, basically their standard operating procedures, and impact their business. And that's why this product shouldn't be put out.
So they're worried about their business, not about patients who need good product.
100%.
Which
100%.
That's just totally ridiculous. And so this product that TruLeaf has developed, it's sort of like, would you say, a coffee pod or something that you would put in a device?
So what it's designed for is a volcano vaporizer type of a device. It's a tamper-proof cup that would fit on there. You know the volcano vaporizer I'm talking about?
Absolutely. I have a similar one called a Zephyr Ion, but yes, it's a desktop
Okay.
vaporizer that blows up a bag, basically.
Right. So that's what they've designed it for, these tamper-proof cups that can sit where the container that you flour in on the volcano is. So it's basically like a disposable volcano cup that they've had to spend lots of money on research and development just to meet the statutory requirements that the politicians put in
to be in compliance.
And this company, they're in compliance. And then you have AFRIA, which is coming in to try and block it. And it specifically states in their motion to intervene that if the Department of Health approves this, then other MMTCs could, put out their own products. Basically, they're trying to slow down another competitor that's in front of them so they can catch up, because AFRIA came in and purchased a license in Florida from a company that was not doing too well.
Was that a legal?
So they're playing catch up.
Yeah. Was that a legal transaction? Or licenses on the open market? Can they just be for sale once you are
100%? Yeah, 100%. And if anybody listening knows someone with a lot of money that wants to buy a license, give me a call. There's a couple that are looking for funding and also that are going to sell.
Well, there should have been some protections for that, because, people going into this business should be going in order to help sick people and patients. So what this Canadian company is doing, and worried about the fact that somebody else has a better idea and they're going to stop a better idea because they don't have that same product. I mean, it's really all about greed when it comes to this particular situation, for sure. So what are you and some other people doing to fight this particular situation with the Canadian company?
Basically what we're doing is just trying to raise awareness to it, because a lot of times, as I'm sure you know, if the public doesn't know about these little motions that get filed, which are kind of the behind scenes nuts and bolts of what goes on in politics, decisions get made that don't really concern the general populace, because if the people making the decisions don't see anyone really caring about it, they're left to their own devices. We think the Department of Health is going to do the right thing and side with the patients and allow this product to come out. So what we're doing is just trying to make sure everyone knows about it, everyone understands what this company is about, and that they're trying to obstruct patients' access to. And let me remind everyone, it's a constitutional right in Florida. It clearly states in the definition that we have a right to all parts of the plant, genus cannabis, whether living or not, seeds, and all extracts thereof. So basically, the entire plant, anything you can produce from it, we have a right to it. And we have a Canadian company trying to obstruct it.
Right. So what is the current model now? What kind of products are available that have been approved, and how many dispensaries are around the state at this point?
Okay, so in Florida, it's a vertically integrated market. So the cannabis has to produce it, package it, retail it, deliver it, provide security. So it's a little bit different than a lot of the other places. And so with that comes the challenges of being able to get products to market when you're doing all these other areas. Right now, there are 13 what we call in Florida MMTCs, medical marijuana treatment centers. And most people think of dispensaries. Now, that medical marijuana treatment center, it has the dispensary, it has the cultivation, it has all of that. Each of those license holders, the MMTCs, can have up to 25 retail locations, which is what, when people hear dispensary, that's what they think of, the retail locations.
Right.
Of the 13, I think 1, 2, 3, 4 have storefronts: Trulieve, Certera, Knox, and Curaleaf, which is down in Miami. Trulieve has 13 open. I believe Knox has a couple. Curaleaf has 1. So we have less than 20 retail stores in Florida right now.
Well, I'll tell you, opening up 13 so quickly. I was just saying, opening up 13 stores by one company so quickly sounds like a big task. How are they doing, and what kind of products are being sold in there, and is there a limit on THC?
Okay, no, there's no limit on THC.
That's good.
You have as much as you want. Some of the products are up to 90% distillate products. So the products we have are mostly, they're all oil-based. I say 90% oil-based. So we have tinctures, we have oral capsules, there are ointments, there are vaporizer cartridges, there are distillate products, which is a concentrate, and there are CO2 products available.
So it sounds like
and they're
all good medicine. It sounds like. And what about
good meds.
Yeah. So what about other kinds of edibles? Do they have brownies and
No
cookies?
edibles yet.
No. That's not legal, or what?
It's legal, but we're waiting on the Department of Health to actually issue the rules and guidelines. So you'll be able to sell up to 10 milligram single servings, and I think up to 100 in a pack, kind of standard what we've seen in other states.
Yeah, but that's more of a
Adult use.
That's more of adult use. See,
Yeah.
now we're talking about medicinal use. Okay, now I've been in the medical marijuana industry, since 2009, and as a patient, and then I went on to manage a dispensary here and develop products and so forth. So, a maximum of 10 milligrams in a dosage. That's great for somebody, even half of that's great for somebody who's just getting started and so forth. But there's people that need 50 milligrams in a cookie or a brownie or a capsule. So can they make like an RSO whole plant capsule that's...
they do have those.
Are they able to make them in 50 and 75 and higher doses, or they have to be 10 milligrams as well?
No, those aren't considered an edible, so they can make those as much as they want.
Okay, good.
What a lot of patients have been doing that prefer edibles is they take this distillate product that TrueLeaf has called True Clear, but it's a really pure distillate, and they're making edibles with that. The issue with not having whole flower, I'm going to just bring it up since you brought up RSO, that's one of the number one things that people make with flour when they get it. If they're making medicine, they make edibles or they cook it down with alcohol and they make their RSO.
Absolutely. That's the medicine. I mean, that's whole plant medicine, and it's so important.
Yeah, and so that conversation gets lost in the flower argument. Most people focus on, well, we want to smoke, and forget the really important issue is that you can't make your own medicine unless you have the raw material. The raw material is the flower.
Absolutely. So obviously, I mean, as far as I know, there's no rules in there for medical patients to be able to grow their own medicine. Okay, so
there's none. You're right.
So what's happening with that? Do you think that'll happen in the future? Is John Morgan still involved heavily into trying to fight the fact that the 71% aren't getting what they voted for? What's happening as far as activists and advocates are concerned now to change things around?
So there are a slew of lawsuits. John Morgan's definitely still involved in trying to get the flower for us. He has one of the preeminent patients, probably one of the most famous ones in Florida. Kathy Jordan's part of his lawsuit. She's a ALS patient that's been living now, I believe, for 4 decades solely with the use of cannabis. That's what she credits it to. So he's filed a lawsuit to remove the smoking ban. Michael Minardi, he has a patient who he is pursuing a lawsuit that involves flower, and I believe that patient is a legal Florida patient and was arrested. I don't know the specifics. It's a fairly new case, but there's a handful of lawsuits, including a gentleman by the name of Michael Bowen. He's suing with a nursery, and he's an epilepsy patient. I'll have him on the podcast probably in a week or two. So the Department of Health doesn't know what's going on. We're definitely going to end up having flower in Florida. Most legal scholars agree that it's pretty clear cut in the Constitution. The issue is since it was ruled illegal by the legislature and the Constitution is in conflict with it, you have to challenge that in a court system. And the Department of Health has a lot of money in there. They actually saw this coming, and they dumped in an extra like $500,000 or $800,000 into the legal fund as they were signing the bill into law.
So let me ask you this. Do you feel that the Department of Health is on board and trying to do things the proper way, or do you think they have the brakes on and they're trying to keep things slowed down? I mean, I know that our Department of Health here in New Mexico is that way. We have a Republican governor, and they just don't want to make any advances here. So how do you feel? Do you think they really want this program to succeed, the current people running the Department of Health?
So that's so the Department of Health, I would say, probably is just completely overwhelmed and doesn't know what they're doing. I don't think that they could even help the patients in the manner that they need to if they really wanted to. Some of their decision making makes me question whether they're trying to slow it down or implement it. But I also know, just from being involved, they only have 30 people working in the whole Office of Medical Marijuana Use. And that's 30 people to issue cards, deal with license issues, and try and get the fastest growing medical marijuana program off the ground.
It's really tough. You know, I got to tell you, I've been watching other states come on board. I think New Mexico might have been the 13th state, and so now we're up into the, almost 30 or something. So these people aren't really trained, and there's a learning curve. It's sort of sad, but others, states like Florida should be looking at other states that have been doing this for, 10 plus years and so forth. But, it's going to be this way almost in every state. It's just, there is a big learning curve, but it's nice to have people involved that really want to see it, move forward. From what you're telling me, Robert, there is some good medicine available there. If you're telling me that there's oil capsules and vape pens and so forth, so it definitely is a start. The Canadian thing, a Canadian company tried to come in here and buy up one of the LNPPs here, and
there's some other foreign interest in Florida too. There's a company that bought in and to one of the license holders. I forget which one it was. But the company that bought into them, they're owned like 30 or 40% by some big Russian oligarch that raises money for Putin.
Oh,
so
you're saying
Florida's an interesting,
you're saying
place.
That Trump has an interest in?
No, not Trump. Putin, the Russian president.
Oh, same thing. Oh, I thought they were the same.
The Russians are invested in Florida cannabis.
Oh my God!
The Russians are everywhere these days.
Wow, I was really joking.
To be expected.
Yeah.
Well, there's a huge Russian population in Miami, Russian immigrants, and so that's not as big of a surprise as some may think. If you go down to certain parts of Miami, you'll see there's lots of Russian-speaking Eastern Europeans, but it's still a little troubling. There should have been like a 2-year residency requirement, like you actually have to put products out, because in Florida, I think some people that go after licenses, and this one that sold to Afria, the Canadian company, I think fits the mold. They're banking on a lottery ticket. We get a license, someone's going to pay us, because they got, I think the guy that owned the majority interest, he got $60 million to cash out.
We have people here, and there's lots of people in other states as well that, just grab the license. They're sort of enacting them, or they're not, and they're waiting for recreational so that they can just go nuts. So that's really a problem that I've seen in many, many different states. So Robert, you mentioned a podcast. Tell me about your podcast.
Yeah, the podcast, it's called The Marijuana Solution. I speak with activists, advocates, industry professionals, mostly from around Florida, since that's where I'm based, but also all around the country. And I like to basically anything that involves cannabis. So, obviously the obvious things, dispensary owners, attorneys involved, edibles makers, extraction guys, lighting guys. But I like to get into like the cultural aspects of it too. Music,
art. Where can we hear your podcast, and how do you get to
iTunes.
it?
Okay, yeah. So if you go on iTunes or the Google Live Play Store, both of them are free apps, depending on whether you have an iPhone or not. Search the Marijuana Solution, and you'll see our logo. It's got the sunburst with the leaves underneath, and it has all of our podcasts there. You can also get them on our website if you don't using your phone. You'd rather stream it while you're at work. Go to floridamarijuana.net, and there's a tab at the top on the menu that says podcast. You click that, and it will have everything.
Absolutely.
I also post them on Facebook, which is at Florida Dispensaries, and that's the only one. And YouTube, which is the Marijuana Solution channel.
Absolutely. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on and really getting into what's going on in Florida. You know, keep up the good fight. You know, we need people like you and Gary Stein and John Morgan and Chris Sunshine and all these guys that are, and people I probably don't even know of out there that are fighting to make the Florida medical cannabis program better than it is, and it's going to take time. I think, you know, it sounds like there's a bunch of dispensaries that's opened up pretty quickly compared to some other states. So thanks for your hard work, Robert, and I hope to have you back and keep us posted on what's going on down there.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and your listeners, and definitely stay tuned. Florida's going to do big things. I think we're going to lead the nation pretty soon once we get we got to get our legs up under us and start to run. Right now we're learning how to crawl, and we'll get it figured out. And I appreciate any attention that anyone wants to bring. I feel honored that you want to speak with me. And, you know, if you want to connect afterwards or reach back out or even come on my podcast, I'd love to have you.
That would be great. Also, we forgot to mention one person who's really been fighting for a long time for this plant, Robert Platshorn.
Oh my goodness!
And the senior
Yes.
tour. We can't forget him. He's been doing this for a long time, and he is, he put his money where his mouth is. He served some of the longest term in the history of cannabis in jail, and he's doing great work with the senior tour down there. So, shout out.
Yeah, he's doing amazing things.
Shout out to him. All right, we'll be right back after this. Thanks, Robert.
The sellers of flowers buy up old roses. They pull off dead petals like old heads of lettuce and sell them as new ones for cheaper and fairer. But they die by the morning, so who is the winner? Not the roses, not the buyers, not the sellers, maybe winter. 'Cause winter's coming soon after summer. It runs faster, faster, chasing off autumn. We go from a warm sun to only a white sun. We go from a large sun to only a small one. When I was a small girl, I walked through the market, holding my dad's hand, mitten and gloved hand. At night there were roses lit up in glass boxes. The heat lamps would keep them from freezing in winter. We never bought them, but somebody must have. Maybe they made it, or maybe they froze up before any person had put them in water and hoped that they'd still be alive by the morning. Who's the winner? Not the roses, not the buyers, not the sellers, not the tellers of these stories, not the fathers, not their children, not those walking on a dark night through a memory they're forgetting. Who's the winner? Who's the winner? Maybe winter, maybe winter. Somebody steps on a light through a tunnel. They're holding a piece of their mind in the rubble. Hold on, I won't let go. I want to know. But no one lives long enough to see the outcome, to know any answers, to know what the point is, to know if the winter ever came closer than on that night when I walked with my father small piece of ice lodged in my mind, lodged in my thoughts, lodged in my eyes. Cold all around, warm from inside, warm from inside. Who's the winner? Not the roses, not the buyers, not the sellers, not the tellers of the stories, not the fathers, not their children. Who's the winner? Not the roses, not the buyers, not the sellers, not the tellers of these stories, not the fathers, not their children, not those walking on a dark night through a memory they're forgetting. Who's the winner? Who's the winner? Maybe winter, maybe winter. Who's the winner? Who's the winner? Maybe winter, maybe winter. Who's the winner? Who's the winner?
The medical marijuana. The medical marijuana. Radio. Radio. Show. The medical marijuana.
Well, I want to thank my guest, Robert Edward Roundtree III, for talking about Florida. And yes, we will have you back. There's really important stuff going on down there in Florida. Also want to thank my two radio mentors, both the initials HS. Thank you for your inspiration. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, if you have your own podcast, if you're an educator, an advocate, an activist, you have a website that's promoting cannabis in a positive light, if you have a product, write us at info@mmjradio.com. Again, info@mmjradio.com. If you'd like to hear our old shows, they're available on medicalmarijuanaradio.com as well as mmjradio.com. My YouTube channel is LSLove88. On SoundCloud and Spreaker, we're MMJ Radio. On CannabisTube.net, we have a channel. You can see all of our shows. Also on Spreaker and iHeartRadio, we're on the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. On NowTV.com, channel 937. And more to come soon. Don't forget to check out Dr. Dustin Sulak at healer.com.
Shalom.
Oh yeah, and fuck Trump. Soon, please.
Hey.